Welcome to Episode 7 in this ongoing series on Pride Month. Before I begin, I want to give a shout out to my recently graduated senior class of 2025 who urged me to finally launch a podcast. I'm pleased to say that in the last 10 days, there are now over 100 subscribers and over 1,000 plays. When I finish with the Pride Month series, my plan is to explore numerous other cultural controversies. If you'd like to support me in this, please don't forget to subscribe or to share this podcast with others. All right, so in Episode 5, I said that gays piggybacked on the cause of blacks during the Civil Rights Movement. A black man cannot help being black. He's born that way. He did not choose to be that way and cannot change it even if he wanted, even if he tried. Many Pride proponents would have us conclude the same about gays. This episode will be the first in a multi-pronged critique of this argument. The first thing to note about it is that people who use it rarely state the argument in its full form. They simply assert that people are born that way, as if that claim by itself is supposed to justify homosexual living. But it doesn't. The belief that someone is born gay proves nothing of moral or legal importance. The person who uses this argument is assuming that if one is born in a given way, they should be allowed to act that way. But we know that's not true. There are numerous immoral and criminal behaviors, such as sexual violence of males against females, that are influenced in part by biological causes, such as genetics and hormones and brain anatomy. And yet we don't permit sexual violence. If a society is already convinced that a person's behavior is unacceptable, it doesn't really matter what might be causing it. It would not matter, for example, if child molesters are biologically predisposed to that behavior. It might motivate us not to punish them as severely. It might motivate us to put them into a rehab rather than prison, but it would not motivate us to accept child molestation as a valid lifestyle option. This simple fact was recognized a long time ago. Some have said that the Born This Way argument was first used in the 1960s to justify the gay liberation movement. That's not true. It was used 100 years earlier, back in the 1860s. Karl Kertbeny is the man who invented the word homosexual. He coined it in order to neutralize the negative connotation of the word sodomy, which was the universally recognized term at the time. Kertbeny is one of the first strategists for gay liberation. But he's also one of the first to expose the chief problem with the Born This Way argument. He did so in a letter to his intellectual associate, Karl Ulrich, who some identify as the true father of gay liberation. Ulrich may have been the first in Western culture to work out the biological theory of homosexuality. But when this argument was first formulated back in the 1860s, the goal was only to decriminalize homosexual behavior. The idea was that if homosexuality could not be helped, then homosexuals could not be punished by the state, any more than they could be punished for being left-handed. But this earliest version of the Born This Way argument was never, as far as I can tell anyway, meant to prove that homosexuality is morally acceptable. It cannot prove that, nor can it prove that homosexuality is psychologically sound. That's because the Born This Way argument, and this is the important point, is compatible with the idea that homosexuality is immoral and or pathological. Listen to the way Kertbeny himself says this. Quote, "To prove the innate nature of homosexuality is not at all useful. What's more, it cuts both ways. The anti-sodomy legislation does not examine whether this inclination is innate or not. It merely focuses on the personal and social dangers of it, on its relation to society. There are, for example, people who are bloodthirsty, pyromaniac, monomaniacal from birth, but they are not allowed to act out their inclinations, even if these are medically proven ones. And in this way, their extremes are isolated from society. Thus, we wouldn't win anything by proving innateness." End quote. Kertbeny's point, you see, is that even if homosexual tendencies are inborn, that is perfectly compatible with it being a mental disorder, or with the behavior itself being a moral vice. The Born This Way argument might garner more pity from society, but it does not and cannot validate the behavior itself. And the followers of Pride don't want pity. They want us to affirm them, to celebrate them, to recognize their choices as an equally valid lifestyle option. Kurt Benny knew that to justify homosexuality, they would have to win the battle at the level of ethics. They would have to find an alternate standard of morality to set over and against that of the Christian worldview. Until that happened, the born this way argument would remain dead in the water. I will explore this problem in detail in later episodes, when I explain why so many philosophers have argued historically that homosexuality is immoral and/or pathological. In this episode, I want to focus on a different issue, on whether one can know that they are born gay. I will ignore for now whether homosexuality is morally right or wrong, whether it's psychologically sound or unsound. So what exactly does it mean to say that someone is born gay? I want to make 3 introductory remarks. First, the claim that people are born this way is what is called a statement about causes and effects. It's a causal thesis, not a casual thesis, but a causal thesis. According to the born this way argument, the cause of being gay is inborn. This is shorthand for saying the causes are biological: genetics, epigenetics, hormones, brain anatomy, and so forth. The effect is being gay, which, you'll recall, is defined by the American Psychological Association as same-sex attractions and sense of identity along with related behaviors. The second point is that this causal thesis is an extremely difficult one to prove, since it's not about the sort of causes and effects one studies in the natural sciences, such as physics, chemistry, and biology. It is dealing rather with psychological matters. The natural sciences deal with physical causes, and here's the point, strictly physical effects. Suppose you get a flat tire while you're driving down the road. You want to know what caused it. You inspect the tire and you find a nail stuck in it. Here you have a physical cause, a nail, and you also have a purely physical effect, a flat tire. In this case, the cause and effect relationship is physical through and through, from beginning to end. But this is exactly what is not the case when we're talking about homosexuality. Homosexuality is an essentially psychological condition, not a physical one. As I noted in an earlier episode, this is one of the reasons why the analogy of homosexuality with race breaks down. One's racial identity is a physical effect of a physical cause. Genetics are physical causes, and skin color is a physical effect. But when it comes to homosexuality, we're no longer talking about a merely physical effect. We're talking instead about a psychological effect. Psychologists study the conscious experience of gays, of how they think and feel and desire and choose to live. They are not, insofar as they do so, studying biological facts. Remember, it's called the American Psychological Association, not the American Biological Association. That's because psychologists are not biologists. Just compare a college textbook on psychology with a textbook on biology. Look at the table of contents. Scan the information in the chapters. You'll find they're very different subjects. Biologists study the body. Psychologists study the mind. The latter theorize about conscious human experience. They're trying to understand our cognitive and non-cognitive experience as humans. They theorize about thoughts, motives, emotions, intentions, choices. This is not to deny that mind and body interact. They definitely do. If you drink too much beer, which is a physical substance, you experience an altered state of consciousness. That's a case of the body affecting the mind. But the mind can also affect the body. We've all had times in our lives where we're just sitting around in a perfectly calm state, and then we start thinking about something that triggers a physiological reaction, say of anger or fear or anxiety. These are not triggered by anything external to us or even by our own bodies. They're triggered by our thoughts, by our thinking, by our conscious decision to dwell on the things within the subjective privacy of our minds. All of this means that when it comes to our feelings or emotions, it's very difficult to know how much of them are caused by biochemistry versus our own thought life. This is why depression is so insanely hard to figure out. Some people think it's a purely chemical problem, and so they attack it with a purely chemical solution in the form of pills. But depression is caused partly by one's thought life. When we descend into states of depression, the path downward is often paved with our own thoughts, our own beliefs, our own evaluations of ourselves and of others, and of our situation in life. What's interesting is that these mental or psychological states can then bring about biochemical states. We can actually reduce our own serotonin levels by allowing our minds to go in dark directions. This then makes it harder to break out of the thought process. There's something of a causal feedback loop here. There might be a psychological cause, say a depressing thought, for a biological effect, like reduced serotonin, but that biological effect in turn can influence further depressed thoughts. So how do we know for any given mood or emotional experience how much of it originates directly from biochemistry versus directly from thought? Well, it's hard to say. But that's just my point. The mind-body problem is an exceedingly complex one. We're not talking about flat tires here. We're talking about what may be one of the single greatest mysteries in human experience, and that is human experience itself. Trying to explain our feelings and desires in terms of nothing but genes and hormones just doesn't track our actual experience. The third point I want to make here by way of introduction is this. To say that gay biology causes gay psychology does not tell us exactly how it does it, or to what extent it does it, or whether biology alone does this. Everyone grants that biochemistry has some sort of influence in our experience and behavior. That's just a trivial point. To say that people are born gay, though, is to go much further than that. For the sake of simplicity, I will distinguish between two different interpretations of the born this way claim. I'll call the one the strong version and the other the weak. According to the strong version, the cause of same-sex attraction is entirely innate, not at all acquired by experience or personal decisions. According to the weak version, though, the causes of same-sex attraction are only partly innate, but also partly acquired as a result of experience and personal decisions. Which version do most people have in mind when they say that gays are born this way? Well, I don't really know, but I can tell you this much. It's the strong version which is the most rhetorically powerful version. If same-sex attraction is entirely due to innate causes, which is to say, to things that have not been chosen or shaped by environment later, then the analogy to blacks will seem a whole lot stronger, at least to people who don't think it through much further. But if instead we go with the weak version of the born this way thesis, the argument loses much of its rhetorical punch. We will then wonder whether and to what degree same-sex attraction is also a result of one's particular social environment, or one's lived experience, or the countless personal decisions that one's made over the years. As I'll explain, the strong reading is what the Pride movement needs to continue persuading Americans. But what the strong version gains in rhetorical power, it loses in factual reliability. It's just not true that being gay can be traced solely to innate causes. It's the opposite with the weak version of the thesis. What the weak version gains in factual accuracy, it loses in rhetorical power. It's simply saying that, at most, you're born with some faint predisposition to acquire same-sex attraction if you're in a particular social environment, and if you decide to use your free will in a given way within that environment. But when phrased this way, it basically amounts to saying that one is not really born gay after all. One becomes gay, and they become gay as a result of an interplay between biology and one's experiences and one's freely chosen decisions and habit formation. This thesis that same-sex attraction is due to innate biological causes alone is often paired with a second claim, that a true gay person is an exclusively gay person. That is, someone who only feels same-sex attraction. I want to explain why this move is really important for people to make. Let's suppose there is a gay gene that completely determines same-sex attraction. If one is born with this hypothetical gay gene, then one is genetically determined to feel same-sex attraction and only same-sex attraction. You need to see why this is a rhetorically important point for the strong version of the born this way thesis. It would mean that gays cannot change the way they feel, and it also means that gays have no other sexual outlets. If one has this gay gene, one is literally unable to feel heterosexual attraction. In that case, a man has only two options in front of him. He can either remain abstinent the rest of his life, or he can enter into a gay relationship. This is why the strong version of the born this way thesis is so important for some people. They realize most Americans will not favor lifelong sexual abstinence, since that seems to rob people of happiness. Perhaps I can make this point more forcefully by having you think through the situation of a bisexual. If one is a bisexual, he could still have a sexual outlet even if we were to ban homosexuality. He's not doomed to a life of abstinence. But this would not be the case for someone who is exclusively gay. This is why the strong thesis, or the gay gene thesis, is so important. It encourages the idea that someone is exclusively gay, which then encourages the idea that such a person cannot help but to feel that way. But here's the thing, this strong version of the born this way hypothesis has a number of really unsavory consequences. Let me give you 7 of them. First of all, what do we do with all the bisexuals in the world? According to the strong thesis, it would follow that they're not really gay. But this seems kind of crazy. If a bisexual man regularly seeks sex with other men, then how is he not same-sex attracted? Secondly, what do we do with people who start off heterosexual and then eventually become same-sex attracted later in life? If they were innately disposed to homosexuality alone, how did they start as heterosexual in the first place? In case you're wondering how that might even happen, Aristotle provided 2 explanations. First, he said some heterosexuals are just libertines, and they feel compelled to push the envelope, to experiment further, to find new methods of sexual arousal. I can only imagine this is happening all the more nowadays with the porn industry, where as a result of being online all the time, both men and women find themselves drawn into increasingly deviant directions. Second, Aristotle references what we now call child molestation. I personally know 2 men who were launched into the homosexual lifestyle after being molested in childhood by older men. One of them told me that this left him profoundly confused about his own sexual identity. Aristotle was, of course, writing during a time when pederasty was widespread. It was just normal for adult men to be in sexual relationships with boys. But whatever the explanation may be for how someone can go from heterosexual to homosexual, the fact remains that it happens often enough to become a real problem for the strong version of the born this way thesis. Thirdly, what do we do with men who start off as gay in exclusively gay relationships, but then change later on to heterosexuals? According to the strong version of the born this way thesis, these people are not really gay, even though they spent decades in exclusively homosexual relationships. But does that really make sense? This leads to the 4th point. The gay gene hypothesis suggests that homosexuality is immutable, that it cannot be changed, that it's fixed and permanent. So what are we to do with the men who were exclusively gay for some time and then switch to a heterosexual lifestyle? The only way around this is for the gay gene theorist to say that these people were never really gay in the first place. But this starts to look like the fallacy of begging the question, of assuming as true the thing that's supposed to be proved. Moreover, this strong version of the born this way thesis starts to look like an unfalsifiable hypothesis. Suppose Sam says that a true gay cannot change. Bill then provides him with someone who, after an exclusively gay lifestyle for decades, changes to heterosexuality. Sam then replies that the person was never really gay since the person changed, and true gays, he says, don't ever change. Do you see what Sam's doing here? He's assuming as true the thing he should prove. If Sam's hypothesis is right, that true gays never change, then he's also right to say that people who change are not gay. But the problem for Sam then is to explain all these people that Bill's bringing up. How can Sam say that someone who only ever feels same-sex attraction, even for a couple decades, say, is not in fact gay? Moreover, it's now impossible for Bill to falsify Sam's hypothesis by any amount of empirical evidence. A 5th argument against the strong version of the born this way thesis is from the nature of identical twins. Advocates of the strong thesis argue that, in the case of identical twins, when one of them is gay, there is a 30 or almost 40 or even 50% chance that the other will be gay as well. This, they claim, proves that homosexuality is inborn. But this doesn't prove the strong version of the hypothesis at all. At most, it proves the weak version. It only proves that there are in fact biological influences, which I don't think anyone denies. But far from proving the strong version of the thesis, the case of identical twins actually refutes it. For identical twins share the same genetic information. So if there really is something like a gay gene, which deterministically guarantees that its possessor is exclusively gay, then why is it that the other identical twin is gay in only 30 to 50% of the cases? That means in the other half of the cases, the other identical twin is not gay. Shouldn't we expect something close to 100% correlation? Personally, I don't put a ton of weight on these twin studies. Part of the problem is that twins, whether identical or fraternal, are raised in a similar environment. I just don't see how it's possible to control for all the other environmental influences so as to isolate the purely biological ones. The sixth problem is this. If we accept homosexuality only on the grounds that it's wholly innate, does that mean that homosexual behavior is wrong for everyone who is not born gay? What about all the bisexuals? Should we outlaw their practices of homosexuality? Well, you know full well that no one in the LGBTQ community wants to say that. They say that anyone may engage in homosexual activity if they want. But this suggests that the born this way argument isn't really the thing that's fueling the Pride revolution. The seventh and final point is this. If homosexuality is due to purely innate causes, then one's social environment and personal decisions would not determine whether one experiences same-sex attraction. But is that even remotely plausible? Do we really want to say that after birth, one's subsequent experience and actions and habit formation play no role in one's feelings and desires and sexual preferences? Let's suppose one first begins to experience what they think are same-sex attraction at the very young age of 12. This means that between his birth and the time he begins to feel that way, he has passed through 4,380 days. To get a sense of how much experience that is, look at your annual calendar and then multiply that by 12. That's a ton of experience. Think about the number of people who have influenced the boy. Think about the number of books and shows and songs that have shaped him. Think about all the millions upon millions of little micro decisions that he's made along the way that have contributed to who he has become by the age of 12. How could he possibly know that this urge, which just rises up within him, was there all along, latent, waiting to just pop up like a jack-in-the-box, and that it did so independently of those 12 years of experience? That just doesn't make sense to me. But if you talk to gays or read their testimonies, they will respond to all of this by saying that they just know in their heart of hearts that they are born this way. But how do they know that? Are they getting MRIs? No. Are they getting blood tests? No. Well, then how are they determining this? The answer we'll see in the next episode is feeling. They have a feeling, a very distinct kind of feeling. In fact, they've even given criteria for discerning when these feelings are reliable or not. So I'd like to explore in the next episode this claim that one can know that they're born gay by simply looking inward to their own feelings. And in the process, what I'd like to do is develop a philosophy of feelings, because I believe this goes to the core of the debate over pride.